This is your no bullshit guide to a happier life. Quick, but not necessarily easy tips to help you to squeeze every last drop of enjoyment out of your business and your life. My name is Helen Calvert. I'm a coach, a business owner and a parent, and I'm so happy to be here with you. I do swear occasionally, as the title suggests, so pop in your headphones if I'm not safe for little ears. Ready to go? Let's do this. Hello and welcome to this episode where we are talking about being our own boss. Yes, you may remember we have talked about this before. If you cast your mind back to episode 9, we talked about how to be the best boss to ourselves that we can possibly be. And that's actually an online workshop that I run a few times a year as well. So you can see the show notes for details of that. And that's very much about how we care for ourselves as our own boss, how we look after ourselves and be the best boss we can possibly be. Today, I want to approach it from a slightly different angle because we are deep diving into our relationship with ourselves this season of the podcast. And I want to talk about how we approach the idea of authority, someone, being in authority, when we are the authority. When we're our own boss, we are the one in charge of ourselves. And it can quite quickly become apparent what our approach to authority is, and we can get ourselves into a little bit of a mess when we are the person in charge. So there are two approaches that stem from childhood, really, that I see so many of us bring to our experience of being self-employed. And you'll recognise these in yourself or in other people, and certainly in the language that they use about themselves and their self-employed experience. So the first one is the approach of, I must follow the rules and I must be good. It's a classic kind of childhood approach. And it's one that probably resonates with me more than the other one that we're going to discuss. And that plays out when we're self-employed in this feeling of I should be working at these particular times and I must work in this particular way and I should be responding to emails in this kind of time frame and I mustn't do XYZ because that's not how we do things in business. And of course, it's quite confronting to realise that none of those rules are real because we're now the ones making the rules. But you will see a lot of people say that they feel guilty if they're not at their desk or working during certain times of the day because they feel as though there's a rule about what perhaps office hours are or working hours are. You'll see people talking about how much time off or holiday or away from work they feel they're allowed or that is reasonable, even though they're their own boss. You'll see people worrying about the way they communicate with clients, their time frames, their boundaries. Do I respond to client messages if they come in at 10 o'clock at night or do I not? How can I be good? How can I follow the rules? And that kind of how can I follow the rules feeling can be so stressful when we realise that we don't actually know what the rules are. And maybe we're trying to cobble them together from past experience and looking at what maybe other people do, a bit of comparison. Oh, well, I think these people are doing this, so maybe that's the rule. And it can be very stressful trying to figure out what the rules are before we try and figure out how to follow them. And of course, when we're our own boss, it's actually up to us to make the rules and to choose whether or not to follow them. Which brings us to the second approach, which again, you'll recognise either in yourself or in other people, which is the approach of, I want to get away with flouting the rules as much as possible. You'll have seen this when you were at school And you'll see this in adults now, maybe yourself, maybe other people, where it's how much can I get away with? How much can I push here? You know, that seems to be the rules. How much can I get away with ignoring them, pushing them, flouting them? And it's almost a delight at kind of getting away with it. You know, how much can I get away with? Oh, got away with that. They didn't spot that one, got away with it. And again, we're the boss. So if we're getting away with something, the only person we're cheating or pulling the wool over their eyes or whatever is ourselves. But you'll see it when people, especially in the language people use, when they say, oh, I'm skiving today. It's like, well, how can you be skiving when it's your own business? You know, oh, I should be doing that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go, you know, I'm going to go off and have some cake instead because, you know, sod it, as though there's somebody else out there wagging their finger and tutting. And there isn't. You are the authority. But it's so interesting to me to see these two different approaches, because it can make it quite challenging to enjoy the freedom of being self-employed if we are taking either of those approaches to it. Now, those approaches to life are things to perhaps explore separately as mindsets, because they will affect the whole of our lives, really. But in terms of being our own boss, of course, as I've hinted at, both of those approaches are absolute nonsense. In the nicest possible way, they're both absolute rubbish. There is no external set of rules that we should follow as our own boss, and there is no external authority that we can hoodwink and challenge when we are our own boss. That's just not how it is. So how do we cope with authority when we are the authority? Well, this is where we have to take a deep breath and realise that old saying of when I look around for the grown-up and I realise I'm the grown-up. We have to realise that we are the adult. We are an adult. We are no longer at school or being parented or wherever authority was felt most keenly. We are the adult and we can decide, and we are deciding, and no one else is deciding for us. Which can sound quite exciting and also quite terrifying. Because when there's no external set of rules to either follow or work to avoid, what are we left with? We're left with a great big blank space. And we don't know what we're supposed to be doing or what we're supposed to be defying. What is there? There's just this big blank piece of paper. What do we do with that? Well, this is where we have to actually think about what we want. This isn't about external authority telling us what we should be doing or telling us what the rules are so we can work to avoid them. We don't have that structure. We make the structure. We build it from scratch. So there are questions we need to answer if we are going to be our own boss. These aren't in any particular order, but some of the questions, or a lot of the questions that we need to think about are: what income level do we need and what income level do we want? You know, realistically, what do we need? And then do we want a bit more than that or do we not? What income level are we looking for? What kind of difference do we want to make in the world, or what kind of impact do we want our work to have? There's no should here, you know. We don't have to be looking to change the world or make people's lives more amazing. It might be that the impact we want is for there to be better designed handbags in the world, or, you know, for car paint to scratch less easily, you know, whatever it is. But what impact do we want to have? What do we want to be happening in the world that wouldn't be happening if we weren't doing it, or wouldn't be happening the way that we do it? How do we want to feel when we're working? That's such an important one. How do we want work to make us feel? And how much space do we want to have for other things in our lives? What are the things we'd like to be able to afford? That can help us to figure out our income goals. Who are the people that we'd like to help? That can help us to figure out the impact we want to make. How do we want to be seen? And that's a whole discussion in itself, isn't it? Do we want to be seen? Being visible, that's a whole other thing, isn't it? But how do we want to be seen? Who do we want to spend time with? Because even as our own boss, or perhaps especially as our own boss, it's essential to have a good support network. So who do we want those people to be? Who do we want to be spending time around? Where do we want to work? What kind of working environment do we want? And when do we want to work? If we can accept that there really are no rules that we should be following or avoiding, when do we actually want to work? What suits us? How can the work that we do satisfy our values? We're going to do a deep dive into values in the next episode. But how can our work support those? And how can we bring meaning to what we do? These are all big questions. And they're such important questions for building a work life that's fulfilling. But we often ignore them because we're too busy trying to follow a set of rules that we were given as children, a set of rules that we imagine everybody else is following, a set of rules we've kind of cobbled together from other places because we desperately want some rules but we can't imagine making our own, or because we're focusing on defying what everyone else expects of us. But these are the things that we really want to look at, and we then can design our business and our work around the answers to those questions. You don't have to work 9 to 5, and you don't have to skive in order to have time to yourself. You are in charge. You can do exactly what you want, and the only constraints are, well, what are my goals, the answers to those questions we've put, and then how can I achieve those goals? So if you can reach your income goals and have the impact you want, feel the way you want, do the things you want by working 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 16 days a month, 4 months a year, the whole year, pick a time frame, then do it, because there are no rules other than the ones that we make. And this, as I say, can feel quite terrifying. And it's, again, as so many things are, it's all about the stories that we're telling ourselves. I worked with a client a few weeks ago, and we were talking about holidays that they might want to take this year and places they might want to go, different types of trips they might like to have. And from a time perspective, they had the time. From an income perspective, they can afford to do the things they wanted to do. So I suggested that they plan a trip for each quarter of the year, for the sake of argument. Okay, 4 little things a year, something abroad, something in the UK, whatever it might be. And they were astounded. 4 holidays in a year? That's excessive, was the word that they used. So we had to dig into their stories about holiday. Because, of course, excessive to who? They're their own boss. They can take the time without having a detrimental effect on their clients, and they can afford to do the things they want to do. So, excessive to who? But it's so interesting, isn't it, that we have these stories and these rules that perhaps we're following unconsciously. Now, if harnessing that freedom that we have as self-employed people just feels overwhelming and terrifying, then please do get in touch using the information in the show notes, because that's something we can work on together. That is definitely something I work on with a lot of my clients, figuring out how to make the most of the freedom that being self-employed brings. But we are our own bosses, and in order to make the most of that, it's important to have a good look at your relationship with authority and your relationship with yourself as the authority in your own life. And we are all the authority in our own lives, regardless of whether we're self-employed or not. But certainly, if we're our own bosses, we really are the person in charge. And we can only make the most of that if we understand how we see being in charge and following rules. So plenty to think about. And as always, while you're thinking about all of those things, please do treat yourself with excessive kindness. and let's see if we can squeeze every last drop of enjoyment out of being our own boss. Speak to you next time. Thank you so much for listening. Did you know that my first book is now available to purchase online? Check out the show notes for details of how to get your hands on a copy. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you could leave me a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when new episodes are up. If you would like to work with me one-to-one or follow more of my content, you can find out how in the show notes. See you next time.